What if you could take that risk, make that change, reach that goal, live your best life? Welcome to another episode of the What If You Could podcast, where we get together with amazing experts and everyday people who share challenges, encourage healing, and explore the possibilities that life has to offer. I'm your host, Gary Scott, and I'm excited that you're along for the ride. Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the What If You Could podcast. And my shimmering guest today is Jill McMahon. Hello, Jill McMahon.
Well, hello, Gary. How are we?
Oh, we're just going to have so much fun. Guys, we're going to take a challenging and serious topic. But we're going to have a little bit of levity and a little bit of fun because sometimes you need that to break into something tough, right, Jill? Don't you think?
Absolutely.
Yeah, so I'm going to go ahead and introduce Jill so everyone knows who we're playing with, and then we'll get started. So, Jill McMahon is a licensed professional counselor and gun violence survivor. For over 2 decades, Jill has devoted her career to helping people heal after trauma, with a focus on the complexities of suicide, loss, and grief. Jill's extensive experience and personal journey make her a trusted and empathetic guide for those navigating the aftermath of traumatic events. Watching communities and the nation at large continue to grapple with the effects of gun violence epidemic brought Jill to write her new release, Bulletproof: Healing After Gun Violence and Trauma. By combining personal stories of survivors with practical, compassionate, and accessible approaches to healing and her own experience as a gun violence survivor, Jill reminds readers that there is hope for healing and recovery. McMahon's Bulletproof offers a vital resource for those affected, empowering survivors, caregivers, and clinicians to navigate the path to recovery and reclaim their lives. So that's
Wow.
a lot of really important. Did you write that? That's really good.
And I don't like to hear it regurgitated back to me. Wow.
Well, you
I'm glad
wrote
I'm
it.
glad you enjoy it, but I know I think like most people, and maybe I'm making an assumption here. I don't necessarily like to hear about myself, right? So, yes, all of that is just a little bit about me. It actually sounded kind of academic, and I'm actually a pretty casual and laid back girl next door type of personality. But yeah, that's a little bit about my professional career.
Well, we're going to dive into both of those. But because we are the What If You Could podcast, I like to always
Mhm.
open up and ask my guests, do you have a what if you could moment, or if you have a what if you could dream, or what if you could idea that you'd like to share with our audience before we get cooking?
I don't know if I have an actual moment per se, but I can comment that most of the time I walk around the planet and I think to myself, gosh, what if I could step into the shoes of the person that I was speaking to right now? How would I see this situation differently? And I probably do that 10 times a day, right? It doesn't matter if it's the pharmacist or if it's the next door neighbor that's making a lot of noise while I'm trying to record a podcast, or, if it's somebody that just cut me off in my neighborhood, I have to stop and go, wow, what if I just stepped in their shoes for a minute to see what they're grappling with up here or what they're thinking about here, what thoughts are distracted with? How would I feel differently about this situation? I just wish everybody else could um practice that as well.
But what's interesting that you say that because in your work, you do walk in people's moccasins. I mean, you walk every
Do.
day in the people's moccasins of the people that you wrote the book for, or you're doing your counseling stuff. I mean, so you do that every day, kind of, don't you?
I do. And I think that's important to point out, Gary, because maybe it makes that practice a little bit easier for me than it does for others. And that's my self-check. Like I have to stop every once in a while and go like, oh, okay, so maybe everybody doesn't see the world quite in the same way that I do. My spouse, whom we're about to celebrate our 30th anniversary. We've been together since we were like teenagers. Like that is so rare, doesn't happen very often these days. But about 10 years ago, we were in the car and I'm sure we were having a difference of opinion about something. And he pulled to the side of the road and he's like, Jill, okay, wait. I need you to realize that not everybody else sees the world the same way that you see the world. And actually, that was such a great mental check for me that, I get to flex that kind of empathy muscle every day, or I get to step into the shoes of another individual who's struggling or hurting or who feels comfortable enough with me to share all their deepest, darkest secrets. And so I maybe see the world a little differently than other people. So it's important for me to remember too, like, oh, it's not this obvious or easy for others to have that introspection or that compassion. They haven't practiced it as much as I have.
Yeah, it's so awesome that you and your spouse can call each other out on stuff because some people just can't do it. That's awesome that you guys have that, but it's
Sometimes,
obviously, yeah, right. Well,
right?
and then you stab them. But
Right,
obviously,
right.
obviously, though, you have a very empathetic side,
Yeah,
where you
we do.
can become relatable to the people that you're trying to help, trying to walk through the different loss and the grief and stuff like that. And it's funny you mentioned about your spouse. I mean, I lost my wife 10 years ago to cancer.
Hmm.
And when we got together, she was 18 and I was 21.
There you go.
This year would be our 36th wedding anniversary.
Wow.
And yeah, I mean, wicked bad when most people don't get there. And we were like just getting started. So, yeah, so there's a
Do
lot of
you,
different sides of
I
grief.
have a question there, Gary. Do you mind
Yeah.
if I interject really
Wait a
quick?
minute. You can't ask me questions. I'm asking questions.
I'm a
Fire away.
therapist by
Do
trade,
it.
I
Give
ask
me
good
the
questions.
question.
Do you remember what's your wife's name?
April.
April. Do you remember when you and April had been together longer than you had not been together?
Absolutely. I mean, in
Did that trip you
total,
out?
yeah, in total, we were together 28 years,
Right.
right? We were only married. I
A
mean,
long
we were married
time.
25 when she passed. But I mean, so, I mean, when when you hit that milestone, when I turned 50, right? And we had been together 25 years, it's like, God, that's so bizarre. I mean, I've
Right.
been with you over half my life, and for it was even longer. But yeah, I remember everything about her like it was yesterday, and it's been 10 years as of last
Oh
month.
yeah.
So
Oh yeah.
yeah, so there's so many different types of grief. But I think with April's loss, the cancer, although it came very quickly, most cancer patients, the doctor goes, "You got 3 months to live, or you got 6 months."
Hmm.
They never gave her the countdown. It kind of happened really quickly, which a lot of people give me shit for because they think I'm lying. Um, but with some of the violence that you're talking about,
Right.
it's a real shock. It's like
Yeah.
your special person leaves the house that day, and
Yeah.
hopefully you do what we do every day is I love you, I hug you, we never leave the house without that. But if you said, "Oh, F you, don't forget to get milk on the way
Yeah.
home, you SOB," and they don't come home,
Right.
it's kind of a whole different thing, right?
It's just a different grief, right? So to me, all grief is valid, but all grief is unique. And that's a grief that is wrapped up in a lot of would have, should have, could have's, right? To some extent, I think that comes in traditional grief as well, but it becomes complex grief when we're dealing with gun violence or suicide. There is this level of maybe if we weren't fighting, he wouldn't have left the house and he wouldn't have been at the grocery store when that shooter came in, or he wouldn't have been so frustrated that he got into a road rage incident with an individual that had a pistol in his car, right? Um, And in the case of suicide, again, talk about complicated grief because you can live with an individual that you have known for some time has suicidal ideation, but still never be prepared or never actually believe that that is going to happen in your relationship, in your family, in your home. So they're both what makes both of those losses different and complex is the shame and the guilt and the sudden nature.
The guilt's so wicked. I mean, I didn't give April cancer, and
Right.
we fought like hell to get the doctors to diagnose it because we knew that's what it was, and they were just being doctorish and
Hmm.
an insurance company-ish. And then the fighting and then all the stuff you go through with that. But suicide is it just seems like such, like they say suicide's a chicken's
A
way out
per
or whatever.
Yeah, yeah, or a permanent problem for a temporary, a permanent solution for a temporary problem.
Right, and it's selfish because
Yeah, it's
you're
selfish.
you're
Yeah.
gone, right? And your pain's over, but man, you just wiped out a whole bunch of other people. And
Hmm.
maybe that's the point, right? Maybe you're like, well, I'm pissed at all of you, so I'm going to kill myself to make you all suffer. But what? I mean, it seems like there's more, right? Is there more? Is the epidemic of
There
suicide
is more.
growing?
Yeah, I love that you're kind of the voice of many men, right? And so I love that you just asked that question because I think that is the biggest misunderstanding and misnomer when it comes to suicide, and that's why shame and guilt are so much a part of the healing after suicide loss. I will tell you, I sat with families for a very long time. I've read journal after journal after journal. I've gone through every single, interaction, incident before a death. I've responded to the scene of suicides itself. And I am 100% certain that suicide is not selfish, that more often than not, it's actually selfless. That is a controversial comment I know I just made, but this is why. So I'm going to dive right in. Um, because somebody who is suicidal is not functioning with a healthy brain. Because our brains are created biologically and hardwired to protect ourselves. That is its number one goal, right? It isn't be successful, make money, land a partner in life, have 2.3 kids, travel. Nope. It is first and foremost to protect myself. So causing self-harm of any kind goes directly against that, right? So the individual that is capable of attempting to take their life or succeeding, I hate that term, at taking their lives, um, that is a person that is not functioning with a healthy brain. Right? There has to be something that is misfiring in that brain, and there are a lot of reasons for that. I mean, I could go on and on as to what those could be, but that unhealthy brain firmly, Gary, firmly believes that they are a burden to those people around them. They don't just think it, they believe it. It is the truth. It is 100%. Nobody wants to deal with my bullshit anymore. Everybody's sick of taking care of me. I am such an asshole half the time, and I don't mean to be an asshole. Then I feel guilty about being an asshole. I can never do anything right. She deserves better than me. My parents are going to be so disappointed in me. There's no way I'm ever going to get in college anymore. Like, those are beliefs in their unhealthy mind. They're not thoughts. So those beliefs lead them to believe that they are a burden and that those people around them that have been fighting so hard for them will be better off if they're out of the picture, right?
Yeah,
It's a lot.
yeah. Well, the thing is, I've lived it. So, uh, about a year and a half after April passed, I went there. I'm like, I don't
I bet.
want to be here. I flat
Yeah.
out, I don't want to be here. And if it wasn't for pictures of my sons being on the bookshelves and looking at them while I'm sitting there with a
Yeah.
9 millimeter going, I'm just gonna blow my brains out. I can't, the pain is so bad. I don't want to be
Yeah.
here. But looking at
Yep.
my boys going, you're without a mom. I can't leave you with a dad. But the pain never went away. And about 6 months later, I had a nervous breakdown. I was in Las Vegas
Mm-hmm.
and I just fell flat on my face. It put me in the hospital, thought I had a heart attack, but I didn't. The guy, there's a name for it. It's like when someone sees blood, they pass out. There's like a
Yeah,
name for the thing that
there
happened to me.
is.
And it was
Yeah.
like you said, your brain just shuts down. It's like your brain. That's what he told me. He said, "Dude, your just body shut you down because you were so far gone that your
Yeah.
brain protected itself and it shut you down." So, I mean, that's what you're talking about, right? As far as when the brain's just
That
not.
is absolutely what I'm talking about. And it's not, um, don't you agree with me that it's misunderstood?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
we don't talk about stuff like that. We live in a culture that won't say the word suicide a lot. Right? When he did what he did, or when he Uncle Joe did that thing, or some families lie about it and, say it was a heart attack. I mean, we can't even talk about the manner of death in our society often. We're getting better slowly. But then there's a whole bunch of shame associated with it for the survivor. So if you're the individual that is struggling with loss, um, man, it's big. It's big. And
Why
if you
you
don't,
said, I'm
good.
sorry. No, no, no.
No.
Go ahead, go ahead.
Well, it's hard for the person who is contemplating. This also goes into mass shootings. Okay. So I'm going to couple these a little bit because I do think that there are some similarities here. What happens to the individual that has been struggling for so long for varying reasons, right? That maybe some of us don't know about, and isn't in an environment where they have the support system, or they have sons to live for, or they have somebody that's looking out for them. If we can't say suicide in our society, how do we expect them to say it, right? So I'm talking about young adults or adults at this point, because children don't have the vocabulary to actually know how to say it, right? But let's just say in their 24 to 80, if culture stigmatizes suicide and we're feeling suicidal, and we know how culture is going to look at us if we go and spend 72 hours in a facility, or if we go get the intensive assistance that we need, or if we go talk to a trauma therapist. Why would we verbalize to people openly when we really need help? So what happens, oh, I could go on and on, but I'm going to make it
Please
abbreviated.
do. No, that's what we're here for, right?
What happens is the body will catch up with you. In your situation, Gary, like I always use the example with individuals of what happens if you don't take out your trash can, right? I mean, it's so simple.
It
People get
overflows
it.
with junk and garbage.
It overflows. But oftentimes what we do is we just keep shoving shit down into the trash can. Like pretty soon you're in the trash can and you're jumping on it because you're trying to compact it because you don't want to go out to the curb and take out your trash can, right? So, I mean, really, in simple terms, the human brain with trauma and grief is not all that different. We just stuff it down, and eventually it will take hold of you. So in Las Vegas, when you collapsed, your body was like, enough is enough. Love you, but you're not listening to us. And so I have no other option but to shut down right now in order to save you, right? Because remember, the brain's number one objective is to keep you alive. So maybe I've been trying to send you signals. I've been giving you aches and pains. I've taken your appetite away. You can't sleep at night, or you're sleeping all the time. You have foggy brain. I call it Swiss cheese brain. You have foggy brain for whatever, 6 months, 9 months. None of it is dissipating. And I'm not getting any real relief. It's incredible the brain, just the body signals to the brain to just shut down. So now if we take that population, if we take younger Garys, I'm going to say, and they've had in school shooters, when we typecast them, we note that they've almost always had an ACE. So that's an adverse childhood experience, right?
They've always had a what?
An ACE, an adverse childhood
Oh, okay,
experience.
okay, okay.
So what that means is they were either
Got it.
raised in an abusive home or have struggled with, learning disabilities and haven't gotten any help for it, that they're neglected in some way, that they've, whatever it is. There's drugs somewhere. Um, they also don't know how to verbalize what their needs are. And if they're old enough that they do know how to verbalize what their needs are, we still live in a culture where it is stigmatized, and now you don't have any support system around you. And instead of your body breaking you down, like happened with you in Las Vegas, you psychologically snap. Right? So I have this opinion. It's not research, but I suspect there's going to be some research out to support it. I have this opinion that most mass shootings are actually a suicide before they're a homicide.
I think they call it death by cop.
Yeah.
They go in there knowing that they're going to get shot.
Yeah.
It's an it's a way of getting killed without killing yourself. You go in there with a weapon, you know a SWAT team's going to come in and most likely
Yeah.
kill you. Makes total sense to me, right?
And for some, or at the end of the event that you are attempting to pull off, you are willing to take your own life. You know that you're not coming home at the end of the day.
Mhm. Yeah. You know,
Right? So if
you
we
had,
can get to those people before they get to that point.
well, that's where I wanted to go with real quick because you mentioned that you had looked into journals. So the question is, I am very, they call me the great deflector, right? You will not tie me down on my emotions or what's really going on. It's not going to happen.
At least
If
you
my
know
friend
it.
Jules listens to this, she's going to know what I'm talking about. So while I'm going through this, everyone's like, God, Gary's doing really well. I don't know. It's just, it's hurting for a little bit, but he seems like he's okay.
Hmm.
No,
Okay.
Care Bear's going down hard. I mean, they said the guy who saw me fall said, "Dude, luckily your face broke your fall. You went down so hard you didn't even put your hands down. I mean, my body
Wow.
stopped, right? It just went boom. And
It's powerful.
but when you're seeing some of these journals, I mean, we know that we are hurting. We just know we're hurting, but like you said, we're not reaching out to people to share it, and then it just ends up in one of these crash and burn missions.
Because it's not safe.
Yeah.
Or because Jer Bear, love that, by the way. I don't know who gave you that name, but I dig it. Because
My
Jer
cousin Debbie
Bear,
when cousin Debbie when I was two. Yeah, it stuck.
go Debbie, um, you were doing so well. So again, I'm not laying blame on anybody. I'm not pointing fingers. There is not necessarily, a best practices way to handle grief. There is, but um, when you get accolades for being so strong, how many times were you told how strong you were?
Yeah.
I will tell you, from my clients, 20 years of clients, that was their least favorite phrase. I mean, I don't know if
Yeah.
your audience likes the F word, but I drop an F bomb like it's, I'm
Please
saying,
do. This is
like,
total fuck you, fuck
it's my
everybody,
it's
fuck
my
this
favorite
friendly.
word. Thank you.
Give me
My
some
clients
fucking
would be
coffee.
like, my clients would literally say, if one more fucking person tells me I'm strong, like, it's bullshit. And I
Exactly.
and I and I get it, but then when you receive the accolade, then you also believe like there's this image that people expect you to live up to, and so now it becomes this very interesting dance. I will note in the journals that I was fortunate enough to have several families allow me to read the journals of the individuals that they had lost to suicide after their death. And two themes were prevalent in both. One was the feeling of being a burden, as we discussed earlier, and not wanting to be a burden to others. And the other was that most of these individuals I found were young males that were academically gifted, smart individuals. And so I pay attention to when I read or hear things in the news because I just think at times, if it's not grief related, so I'm not talking grief related now, right? But individuals that live in that brain, they just see the world differently. And they know that they're the odd man out. And they know that they maybe don't want to stand outside or sit in that corporate meeting and talk about who won the Vikings game last night. They don't give a shit who won the Vikings. That is not how their brain is working, right? And so, after years and years of that, it's kind of where do I fit type of thing.
What do you, I mean, think about the soldiers, right? I mean, basically, if you're a soldier, one of my sons is in the Air Force, and there's been some bases that he's been to around the world where it's just like suicide capital, right? I mean,
Yeah.
if you go to a base in Missouri, they call it misery. It's basically Camp Suicide out there because these guys, and to go to seek help if you're a soldier, right, man or woman, is
Yeah.
not only frowned upon, but it could get you booted,
Yep.
right? So it's like,
Yep.
not only are you putting me in a situation which is causing massive PTSD,
Massive.
but you don't give me an outlet
Right.
to heal it. So what's my run recourse to end the
It's a
pain?
big, and that is one of the biggest challenges that I think as a country we've been attempting to overcome in the last 20 years. Again, we have a long way to go. I mean, you and I very recently, um, in the news, there was the Las Vegas bombing, right? The
Yeah,
singular Tesla.
yeah,
Was a
yeah.
gentleman
He
who, was
he's still
carrying
alive.
around so much
He's in Mexico.
PTSD.
He's still
It's
alive.
in
He's down
Mexico
in Mexico.
somewhere.
He's definitely still alive. But so what's the deal? How do we see it coming without putting how about how do we see it? I don't know how to say it. You're smart. I'm not a very smart person. How do we see this coming? Like you said, we have the journals, but we're reading them afterwards, right? I'm being Mr. Strong Guy. No one's really knowing that I go home and cry every night and hug a nine because I just want the pain to end, right? So, what are the signs? I mean, how do we spot these people that are suffering so that somehow we can get to them without stigmatizing them and get them help?
Well, I'm going to be mindful about that word guilt that we said we were using earlier. Um, because if I gave you a list of three things, right? How many people, there isn't a list of three things. Let me just say that right there. But how many people would that instantly turn into a guilt trip of, oh shit, I should have, but I didn't. So what I'm going to say is there's a reason why we have yet to cure the suicidal mind. Um, because it's very challenging and it's very different in each individual and it's not cut and dry and it's even more complex when it comes to youth versus the senior population, right? They have a whole different uh, desire and or focus on death than a 24-year-old. So first and foremost, I think the best piece of advice that I get is just not to be afraid to talk about it. And I would love to see family members be more comfortable walking up to somebody they love saying, do I need to worry about you? It's not saying, are you actively suicidal, Gary? I mean, that's a conversation that may just end right there because you would probably, closed in Gary would be like, nope, what are you
Nope.
talking about? I'm good. Like, I'm good. Haven't you noticed? I'm good. I'm socializing. I'm eating 2 meals a day. Like, I'm good. Instead, a less abrasive way of saying that is just, what if you got a phone call saying, do I need to worry about you? Like, I'm just noticing some stuff and I'm worried about you. When it comes to suicide, my friend, there are often never telltale signs that we could have pointed out. That's what makes it so complicated, right? When I'm dealing with friends and family members that have been left behind after a shooting event, a school shooting, or a suicide, pay attention to them. What I'm noticing happening, and actually one of the reasons that I wrote the book, um, it wasn't because I'm a gun violence survivor myself. I'm healed. I'm good. I'm so good. But I'm watching a population in our country that is growing, and I don't see it slowing down anytime soon. At least maybe in my grandchildren's lifetime, I think it might. I think in my lifetime, it's probably not really gonna slow down. And what happens anytime there is a shooting event, big or small, is that it becomes political, and we talk about where the individual got their firearm, and 48 hours later it's forgotten. Who's forgotten with that? The survivors. The
Mhm.
survivors. And so to me, we are missing an entire, like, you want to go full circle and everything we've talked about in the last 30 minutes, you are missing that population that is not being supported and cared for in the way that they need to, who's going to keep shoving shit into their trash can over and over and over, and it's going to overfill, and it is overfilling because we don't have the infrastructure yet. We haven't thought this through. Um, and so we need to support the survivors. So I do want the same thing to occur if, and by survivor, I feel like I need to define that, Gary. It isn't necessarily somebody that has been shot and survived. That's not who I'm talking about. When it comes to gun violence, I'm talking about an individual. So let me back up. In 2023, the Kaiser Family Foundation did research and published a report that said 54% of this country has been impacted by a gun violence incident.
It's a big
A
number.
lot, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
what that means is, to define it, you have witnessed a gun violence incident. Somebody in your family has been impacted by a gun violence incident. Somebody, you or one of your family members has been shot. Somebody that you know has been murdered. Um, you can be a secondary responder. What about, are we talking about the EMTs and the paramedics and the fire department, which, by the way, FD has a high rate of suicide? Um, are we talking about the individuals that go and clean that up? All of these are things that the brain isn't hardwired to process, but we're seeing more and more and more of it in our surrounding neighborhoods and communities, right? And I don't think we're checking in with those populations. So it's pretty similar. Like, we talk about it for 2 days, it becomes political, and once it becomes political, we stop caring about the survivors at all. It becomes a whole different something else, which is really unfortunate. And I need people to circle back and say, do you need help? Do you need assistance? Maybe we need to go in like we do with the vets with NPTSD. Maybe we need to go in and do a couple sessions to clean some of those images out. Even though you say you're cool and you're good, I believe you. Like, you're cool, you're good. Sure, sure, you're cool and good. But I'm just thinking it wouldn't hurt to go like clean some of that shit out. Because, in writing the book, I interviewed parents of children who were in a school at the time of a shooting.
Mm.
Now the child was on the completely separate end of the classroom. But y'all are fooling yourself if you don't think that that child now struggles with anxiety, has difficulty sleeping 6 years later, right? Like, their brain development has been altered and changed due to that trauma.
That stuff sticks with you. I mean, I
Yes.
I had a guy just completely take me out when I was snowboarding. The dude just flat out
Oof.
was out of control.
Oh,
I slammed into me. I freaking took me out. I was laying in the snow for 20 minutes. The EMT guys came. It was just a nightmare. And now when I'm snowboarding, I've got that in my head all the
Yeah.
time. I'm listening. I can
Yes.
hear the sound. I'm listening for people. My head is more on a swivel. I mean, it just sticks with me. Like, is
Your
someone else going to take
senses.
me out? Right? It stays there. But I have I had another uh, podcast called Grief Pie. Two guys eating grief one bite at a time. It was a friend of mine who lost
Love it.
his spouse to cancer, and we've been friends for 30 years. And so we got together. Let's try to get men to talk about their grief and their and of
Love it.
losing a spouse. Right? Not even close. No dudes would come out and talk about this
Oh,
stuff
really?
at all. But in that, like 90% of the people who listened to it, even though it was geared to men, were women. And I'd have gals reach out to me and say, I lost my son 32 years ago, and I still can't eat. I don't sleep. I can't eat. I mean, I'm like, that's a long time.
Yeah.
I've got friends 28 years, 16
Yeah.
years. It, the damage stays so long.
Yeah.
And when I went to a doctor, I went to three different psychologists, psychiatrists, whatever they are, to look for help.
Yeah.
And it's shocking how un I don't want to stigmatize the whole industry, but
Go for it.
it's shocking how i- incapable a lot of these therapists are when it comes to loss and grief. They're not trained for that or something. I don't know. It was just this one gal was like just was going through Grief for Dummies. She just pulled it off. I'm like, I already read that book, dude. I don't even talk to me, right? But you know what I
I
mean?
wrote a
Do you
review for
find
that book. Don't,
right?
yeah.
Yeah. So do you find that? I mean, that people just there aren't even really a lot of resources for people who are suffering, the survivors.
So, so there aren't a lot of resources. And I will tell you that I'm 50 something years old. And in this next stage of my life, that is what I am dedicating this next stage of my life to. It is now my purpose. So I spent 20 years of my life working solely with survivors of suicide, right? As I told you, I sat alongside of families from day one to years in. Um, and my heart is still there, but I've somewhat closed that door because I feel like I've done my work there and there's way more work to be done over here now. And that is educating clinicians, right? Part of the book. I mean, the book's title is Healing After Gun Violence and Trauma, a guide for survivors, caregivers, and clinicians.
Mhm.
Because there's this population out there that I'm not 100% sure we feel comfortable and competent treating. And so, your experience is one that I've heard over and over before, and I'm so sorry for that. I am, because you did all the right things, Gary, and you went out and you sought help, right? I don't ever want anybody to be sidelined from doing that. But I hate that you had to go through a few till you feel like you really got some. And so I
Didn't
think I'm
never got one.
never got some. Never got one.
Nope, never got one. I stopped at three. I'm like three times a charm. This isn't going to work. I'm going
That's
to
fair.
figure
And that's
something
fair.
else out.
And that's fair, right? And yuck. And I hate that, and you're not alone. I will say that I think I'm wise enough to know that the older population of clinicians are brilliant and wise and smart, but I'm probably not going to change the way that they practice at this stage. So my goal really is to help try to get into universities and speak to master's level younger clinicians on what I am hearing from the client. There's the blue couch right there. What I'm hearing is needed and what works most effectively. And we have really in the last 15 or 20 years, I will say, the younger generation of clinicians have really changed their way. We're not being trained necessarily in Freud anymore. We don't just, I mean, we really sit and develop a relationship, but makes a huge difference.
Do
You're
you
about to ask a
see?
question, I can tell.
Yeah, you could see my little brain scrunching. You could see my All of a sudden, I looked like I was thinking, which was painful for me. Um, did you see though that there's just a lot of pharmacological help in the therapy, right? I mean, it's like, yeah, you're grieving. Here's a Xanax. You'll be fine, right? I mean, I think there's just too much,
Drives me crazy.
right? I mean, we have to get away from that because it's like you go see a doctor for grief or pain, and the next thing you walk out with four prescriptions for different stuff. That's probably not going to take you down the right alley, right? Because
That probably
that's
that
your
what it's
trash
gonna
can
it's your
thing.
trash can. What that's gonna do is it's gonna be a band-aid, and it may temporarily make you feel some relief. I'm not saying that at times medications aren't warranted. They absolutely are, but not nearly as much as they're being prescribed, in my opinion. So, research has shown that medication is only 50% effective if it's not coupled with talk therapy. Great, take that pill for again that momentary biological or physical relief. But if you're not cleaning out your trash can, you're not getting to the core of anything. You're not cleaning out, even if you don't think I'm just gonna implore anybody who listens to this, even if you don't think that you have anything to clean out, trust me, you got some shit to clean out. We all do. Every single human being does. We have stuff. We have, voices in our heads that tell us that we're not capable. And this is why we were told when we were younger that we weren't made to do that and we need to do this instead. I mean, we all have stuff. So if somebody gives you a prescription, but you don't ever resolve that inner narrative or that voice that's telling you that life will never be good again, life will never be the same again, you're never going to find another partner again, you're just going to be whittling away like an old man on the couch forever. Like until you un untangle some of that, the medication's just medication. I'm a big proponent too. This is going to sound a little wonky, but physical activity
Hmm.
is an antidepressant. It's a natural antidepressant. And new research came out last year or the year before, so 23 or 24, that stated that nature is more beneficial than any prescription you can ever put in your mouth. Okay, so I'm going to put some onus on us as the clients, as society. Why do we just accept the pill instead of getting up every morning, depressed or not, and going for a walk, going to the gym, walking the dog, breathing some fresh air, getting sunrise, sunset, and talk to a friend if you don't want to go to therapy? Why don't we engage? So we're partially to blame. Like, why don't we engage in those things? Why do we just accept the pill? Because it's easier.
Well, and every other commercial on TV is by a pharmaceutical
Yeah.
company with a bunch of dancing clowns and unicorns and saying, all this is great. You take this, besides the anal bleeding and the heart attack and the aneurysms and the
It's
stroke, and,
and the
but
genital
you'll be,
warts. Yep.
but your skin will be clear.
No.
It's because the pharmaceutical company runs the insurance companies run the hospitals, and the pharmacological companies run the healthcare and the doctors and stuff like that. But you touched on a lot of stuff. I mean, endorphins basically are a natural way of taking
Yeah.
the pill. The pill is supposed to just give you the endorphins, or you could exercise, lose weight, eat right, and try to get the endorphins. The other thing is, I mean, you look back to 100 years ago or more, 4,000 years ago, and psychiatric wards and hospitals had sun decks. I mean, they would try to wheel the patients into the sun every day because they knew the sun and vitamin D was healing to get them out of these cold, sterile rooms, right? Just the sun itself to get out there in the sun. But you
That's a
touched on
beautiful
something,
point.
yeah, which they don't
Yeah,
do that anymore.
I've never actually thought of that. You're absolutely right.
Yeah, but if you look back at some of these old sanitariums and stuff like that, and the old hospitals, they had sun decks. They
Yeah.
took patients out in the sun. They wheeled them out there. But the other thing you talked about is, with the guilt, and the survivor. I mean, talk about the guilt of a parent whose child commits suicide. I mean, talk about the what ifs and the wow, did I fail and where did I go wrongs, right? I mean, that is wicked bad.
It's unmatched. It's unmatched in relationship to any other um, grief that I have experienced before. And if it's rational or irrational, it doesn't matter. But I have yet to meet one single parent that has not just um, held on to that guilt like it is a life draft. And it is interesting because what I have come to learn is that it doesn't matter how much work we do together or, how much I try to rationalize or process it or unpack it with them. A lot of them believe that the minute that they give up that life raft of guilt, right? Or that story, the would have, could have, should have's, or that they did something wrong or they should have seen, or their job was to protect their child and they missed the mark. The moment they won't let go of it because they believe that that connects them with their child in some way.
That is so brutally sad. It's so brutally sad. It's just such a double loss. I mean, you've
Oh
stopped
yeah.
living because your child's no longer here, and you've wrapped yourself in this blanket of guilt and sorrow and woe is me and
Yeah.
what did I do wrong? I mean, I literally know friends and stuff who've just shut down. They
Yeah.
haven't dated in 20 years,
Yeah.
they look horrible. I mean, that physically it's like it is so detrimental to their health, their mental
Yeah.
health, their physical health, their financial health. It's just ruined them. I mean, how do we get people over that hump? I mean, is there a way that you've seen with either Bulletproof or the people you've talked to, the clinicians? How do we get these people over this hump?
I think the answer is one that people don't necessarily want to hear, but it really is time. It's so cliche and it's so gross, but there really is something to it, right? I mean, when something catastrophic like gun violence or suicide occurs in your life, you lose faith in the world and in your safety. Because again, even if somebody in your life was suicidal and had made attempts before, mentally you still never saw it coming, right? You just sent your kid to school. That's all you did. You just sent your kid to school. That's what you were supposed to do today. That's what you did every Tuesday. You never saw it coming. And so, you know, you really doubt that you can trust anything for a very, very long time. So, in addition to overcoming the loss and grieving the loss, which is really, really important. I mean, I think with those two type of traumas, you need support. I'm just going to say, even if you don't think you need support, you need just go and seek it. If it's not for you, it's not for you, but you've tried, right? I'm not sure. I do know that people can get through it without support, but it's just going to be a hell of a lot easier. So get support for the loss itself, and then you need to give you need to rebuild your trust in the world. And that takes time. But I've watched people, I mean, Gary, it's incredible. I mean, I've watched people successfully do it over and over and over, but I would never, in the first 3 months, 6 months after somebody's experienced a catastrophic event like that, if they came into my office and I were to say to them, oh, it's just going to take time. I mean, not only would they want to punch me in the stomach, they'd leave and they wouldn't come back, right? So, I just sit with them where they are for as long as they need to be there. We may tell the same story over and over again for 6 months, but they're not finished telling the story. So that's why they need to tell the story. You provide this amazing space for people to tell their stories. That's healing for them. It's probably healing for you too. Like it's just like there is something very cathartic in that. Um, but then it's just time for them to realize like, oh, it's Tuesday and nothing horrible happened today. And it's been Tuesday for a year and a half now. So Tuesdays are safe again, maybe. And every school setting or mall or, Circle K doesn't have a gun wielding assailant in it because I've been to a couple since then and nothing has happened. Right. So that stuff just takes a while.
And it comes in waves, time does help. I mean, early the waves were so strong. I'd be just
Yeah.
standing
Oh my
there,
gosh.
you know, buying toothpaste and I'd start weeping, right? And
Yeah.
so a couple years down the road after that, it was like you just start weeping a little bit less. And now I think I've only had a couple breakdowns in the last year and it's been 10 years, but they're pretty good weeps. I mean, they're really deep, sobbing kind of weeps.
Yeah.
And then you just start laughing your ass off because that's what God or the universe does for you after you have a bad cry. You start laughing. Um,
But here's my question to you. When you were in those beginning waves, those beginning weeps, did your brain, this is about your brain now, did your brain ever believe that you could be 8, 9, 10 years later and only weep occasionally? That you could
well,
ever feel any
well,
relief?
because I'm the great deflector, I didn't allow myself to feel pain for the first
Mm.
at least year.
Yep.
Matter of fact, I jumped in a relationship and got engaged to a gal within 4 months after my wife passing,
Yep.
which was a massive crash and burn mission. And unfortunately, they all blamed her
I've
instead of
seen it
me.
happen.
Oh
Yep.
yeah,
Yeah.
matter of fact, my current wife, I am now remarried, and her mother did that twice after the
Yep.
death of a
I've seen it
husband.
happen
Yeah, you just
over and
jump
over
right in.
again. Yeah.
Because I'm not someone who likes to be alone. Most men don't want to be
Yeah.
alone. We're all a bunch of sissy boys. Um, but I want to touch on what you had mentioned. So you were saying that is it gun violence now that you want to dedicate your shift to? Is it
Yeah.
the survivors of gun violence?
It's for
Kind of
this.
moving from the suicide part
Yeah.
into the gun violence. Why is that? Why do you think? I mean, is there really that big of a difference between the gun violence and the suicide
Not a
epidemic?
lot, no. No. And so it's an easy pivot for me, right? We
Yeah.
obviously know where my passion lies, because I dedicated 20 years of my professional life to survivors of suicide. But that's my professional life. My personal life's passion is survivors of gun violence. And so, in full transparency, because I can be an open book, a couple years ago, I started to burn out professionally. It's really hard hearing people's traumas day after day after day. And I loved it. And I still do love it. And I viewed it as an honor, but I didn't take any of their stories lightly. And, I had to do the hard thing, Gary. I had to do the hard thing. Like, here's the deal. I'm good at what I do. I was successful at what I do. It was post-pandemic. Everybody and their mother, brother, and uncle decided that mental health counseling was okay. I mean, I could have had a line out my door for forever, but that was not going to be in the best interest of me, my family, or the client. And so, I didn't even really have to pull up my big girl pants. I'm a person that knows just do the right thing. And I was like, it's time. I'm not going to serve them as much because I can't hold as much in my tank anymore of their stories. And so then I was like, it's time to pivot into my personal passion. And my personal passion, because I am a gun violence survivor from childhood, has always been, um, how can I help in that realm? We have a situation that is not getting better, and there are a lot of people that are hurting. And so how can I take what I've learned from the suicide survivors, right?
Mm-hmm.
With that, I need to say 51% of suicides are by firearm.
Mm, yeah.
Those numbers, those deaths are rolled into our gun violence deaths. So we've just decided in the last couple years to bring those two statistics together. So really, I mean, it's actually a very natural progression. I've done everything in. I rest well at night knowing that I've done everything that I can in my power for suicide survivors, and now I think I need to turn it into a different focus and maybe help educate clinicians, right?
I don't want to squirrel away from that, but just quickly, I just want to say,
Yeah.
how do you protect yourself? How does Jill protect herself from the constant hearing these stories? I mean, at some point, it's got to get pretty tough, wear you down.
Yeah, yeah. It wasn't at first. I was a lot like Gary at first. I am also the master deflector. That's why when you were reading that bio and I was like, ugh, I hate that. My friends complain constantly that I will never answer any of their questions about me ever. And I don't ever want to talk about myself. Why do you think I'm a therapist? I just want to talk about other people all the time. I don't want to talk about myself. So I'm horrible.
That's why I'm a podcast host and not a podcast guest. I was
Did
one
you see
time a
me try
dude,
to turn it on you a couple times
right? And I'm
too?
like, you can't do that.
No,
Jill,
damn
you
it.
can't do that. Who do you think you are? But
You held so tight.
I had a friend bring me on one. She goes, "Oh, you'd be a great guest. Come on, you're great on your show, and you'd be a great guest." I was a horrible guest. I'm like, I don't know. I don't want to ask.
I
What do you
don't
think about
know.
this? I don't know.
Uh, sure.
But at some
Um,
point, I mean, like I've got some good friends that are pretty deep empaths, and to make it worse, are Virgo empaths, and it's like they need a day just to get over the fact that they went to get milk and they were out and they came home. It's like, they need a whole day to recover from that. It's so
so
just
I will say that I'm a master compartmentalizer, and probably because of my childhood trauma, here follow this whole circle. That is my ACE. That is my adverse childhood experience. I'm actually very good at compartmentalizing emotions. And so that is a skill that I learned very early on. So I really could take other people's pain, take every other people's visions and stories and store it away, leave here at night, lock the door, and go home and make peanut butter and jelly sandwiches for the kids. Like it used to just, and I would say in the younger years, I worked in Washington, D.C. in a grief and loss agency. And in the younger years, I would say, I think I have a sickness. Like I am hearing the darkest of dark things. We're talking about an 11-year-old that took his life, and I went home and made spaghetti. Like, what is wrong with me? But I could really compassionately sit with you. I could just turn it off really quickly. What started to happen, which you just alluded to, as I got older, I had less capacity to hold it. And that's when I had to do some deep diving. And so, I've learned in my age that I have to do other things. I am a dopamine girl. So, I'm also an indoor cycle instructor 3 days a week. So I can sit. Are you shocked with this loud mouth over here? But
I'm totally shocked.
totally shocked, Jill. Um, but I get that natural dopamine burst. I do watch sunrise and sunset every day. I do, cold exposure therapy, and I have my own therapist. So this is a great story. Us women, if there's anybody that's listening that is of the female nature, us women once a year have to go see our GYN. So yeah, just nod, Gary. You're like, yeah, okay. So I was visiting my GYN about 5 years ago, and I must have been mentioning something like, "Oh, I'm sorry, I'm late. I was at therapy," and she's doing her thing, you know, whatever. She's doing gloving up. She's doing her thing, and she goes, "Wait, wait, you're in therapy?" And I'm like, "Yeah." She's like, "But you're a therapist," and I was like, "Yep," and she's like, I don't know why. I mean, she like stepped back from the table. She had to take a minute. She's like, this just, I never like, is that weird? Like, do most therapists go to therapy? Like, don't you know all of the skills? Like, I don't understand. I guess I've never thought of it. Okay, my friend, I just looked at her and I go, well, do you have a GYN?
Or do you
Right?
self-examine?
Right.
Right.
So I think every good therapist has to go to therapy, should go to therapy themselves. We hold a lot of shit. Like
Jill,
you need
Jill,
somewhere to let it go.
let's look at it like this. Every mechanic has a car that's not running right. Every contractor and handyman's house needs shit that needs to get done. I mean, we don't take care of the stuff that we are experts at a lot of times, right? And with that, I just wanted to follow up on the deflection. Um, were you starting to hit the wall because you got tired of the same bullshit? I'm trying to be nice. Hearing this over and over, like you guys aren't going to get healed because you don't want to. You're just in a whining session because people are all victims now. And you just go, you know what? This isn't working for me. So I'm going to shift over here. Or was it this, you'd already done it, been there, done that?
Nope, it was not that my clients weren't willing to do the work. By the time you make it to me, I mean, I see the darkest of the darkest, right? And so I know the amount of effort it takes to actually go into therapy. It's not easy. Like I know people would much rather be anywhere else but sitting in my office. Um, and everybody, I just was able to meet everybody where they are, and I believe that everybody was doing the work that they needed to do. It was that I was having a hard time releasing that trauma at the end of the day. I was having a hard time going home and making the peanut butter and jelly sandwich and leaving it in the office and not staying up at night worried about, is Mary's other son going to die by suicide as well because they're experiencing so much grief over losing their brother, or Joseph, is his anxiety over being in the congressman's office, when a shooting was happening at the state house. Is his anxiety valid, and is his anxiety going to push him over the edge? Like those are the things that I couldn't let it go. And so, when it started to impact my health, I guess you would say, my
Yeah.
mental wellness,
Yeah. It was
then
time.
I'm not going to be a good therapist after that. I'm not.
Yeah. Well, I mean, your trash can got full, you
Yeah.
know? I mean, the trash
And
can was
I
full.
had done all the things that I had needed to do. Oh, can you hear me?
Yep.
You
Yep.
disappeared really quick. I
Yep.
had done all the things that I had trained others in doing to take care of myself, and it wasn't as effective anymore, right?
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So besides your new book,
hmm
Bulletproof,
hmm
Healing After Gun Violence and Trauma, besides putting out the book, and you shifting to get your focus more on this, I mean, what can be done, Jill? I mean, what can we do about the escalating gun violence that we're seeing in our country?
We need to start taking care of each other more. Again, it's not an answer that anybody really wants to hear, Gary, but there are so many hurt people that are slipping through the cracks, and we are all so busy, and we are all just living our lives, and we are all doing the best that we can, but we have stopped focusing on what matters, and that's our neighbors and ourselves. And we have people that are just mentally disappearing and ending up feeling so desperate, like they don't have another option. I try really hard when it comes to this subject matter, and I'm still working on it because it's hard not to make it political, because I don't, to me on my mission, that isn't what matters.
Yeah.
But it sure would be a lot easier if firearms were less accessible, right? And again, I know there's varying opinions on that. I do know there's varying opinions on that, but I also know the suicidal mind in particular. And you can't, if you can get to the suicidal mind in time, um, y- you can combat it. You absolutely can combat it. But with a lethal means like a firearm, your opportunity for success there is so narrow and slim, So it just, yeah,
I
I don't have all the answers.
we're running a little bit over on time. Are you all right with that? Just real quick.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay, because
yeah.
I have one other thought. Well, I had two other thoughts, but my brain only holds one at a time. Social media. Did you see that study that they did with TikTok that they proved that they could take kids all the way to the point of suicide?
hmm
Just see that? I mean, so
I'm reading
they
a book about it right now, actually.
Are you? Yeah. So
Mhm.
it's incredible that they can say, okay, these kids already feel bad about themselves. Now we're going to send them these messages. We're going to make them think this. We're going to push them to the point that, you know what, you're right. Suicide's the only answer for you, buddy. And they can push kids in this direction. I mean, what role do you see as social media has in a lot of these suicides and a lot of this gun violence and things like this that we're seeing?
I'm going to say definitely add social media into the recipe, right? It is not the only ingredient, but add it into recipe where we already have, and everybody has. It's not just our problem, but what makes it is our problem that is different than everywhere else is that we have such a high accessibility to firearms, but we have a society, everybody does now worldwide, that is very disjointed. We're very disconnected from one another.
Yeah.
And that happens slowly over time. It's not 4 years, it's not 8 years, it's probably 25, 30 years, right?
Yeah.
So we take a disjointed culture. We've added in 2004 when the smartphone became accessible in somebody's hand for the first time, really started being used in 2006, 2007. And now we have internet, we have Snapchat, we have Instagram, we have TikTok. All right, so the algorithms in TikTok that can pick up a mood if that's dangerous, risky, or depressive, and just based off of your searches and within like certain hours, it can flood your feed 30% with that messaging, right? Give it 48 hours, it can flood your feed 70% with that type of messaging. That's not helping. That's that is not helping us. I will say that I have a lot of faith. I think there is some change on the horizon occurring. Um, but I do think we're going to have a 25-year span of kids, now adults, millennials, Gen Xers that were raised with a device in their hands, that brains are now hardwired differently than your brain and my brain because we didn't have those. But I think by school year 2025, if not school year 2026, there will not be phones allowed in classrooms anymore. That's a huge start.
Wouldn't that be a great thing? Is it the Chaos Machine? Is that the book that you're reading about the internet? The Chaos Machine?
No,
Oh,
no. So, Jonathan Haidt, if you haven't heard of him, Haidt, he is a professor out of NYU, and he's done a ton of studies about what social media is doing to kids' brains, developmentally, neurologically, and that's super interesting. And I'm
mhm.
also reading a novel called The Salzburg Executioner. It's a novel, but it's written by a past US tech CEO, and it's fictional, but it's a book about how algorithms can promote
Mm.
suicide.
It's a very, very scary thing. Well, Jill, you've been so gracious with your time and you've been amazing. So I have one last question, I promise, and then I'll let you go.
I'm
One last
ready.
question. I lied at the beginning of the episode. I
Great.
flat out lied to you when I said I
Awesome.
only have one question. Because I always have two questions. The first one I give you,
Okay.
that's the what if you could question. But
Yeah.
the second question I always ask my guests before we sign off is there something that you'd like to share with our guests that means something very deeply to Jill McMahon? It could be a saying, it could be a philosophy, it could be a vision, it could be something that you want. But is there something you'd like to leave us with that's just a
Mm.
message that really resonates hard with you that you want to share with us?
One of my favorite things to share with people is pretty simple, and it's that the brain believes what you tell it. So please be careful what you say to yourself.
You know, I tell people all the time, be kind and gracious to yourself because
Mm,
it's not easy being you.
mm-mm.
You know, we
For any of
beat the
us,
crap out of ourselves all day long. And this was before social media piled onto the scenario, right? So
right?
you are very true, my friend. Your brain just, just be nicer to yourself. Holy,
I know.
holy cannoli. So, all
Work on
right,
your
everybody.
thoughts.
This was our friend Jill McMahon. And again, Jill is the author of Bulletproof: Healing After Gun Violence and Trauma. Um, Her new mission in life is to help try to get us out of this death spiral of gun violence and what it's doing to families and what it's doing to children. And it's just not a good thing, right, kiddo?
Right. You got it. Thank you. Thank you for giving me a platform to share my thoughts and to start my mission work. I appreciate you, Gary.
Yay. Well, let's get this out to 10 million people and let's see who we can heal. So,
I'd
all
love
right,
it.
everybody.
Let's
That was
go.
uh, that was an episode of What If You Could with our guest Jill McMahon. I was so grateful she was here, and we will see you guys next time. Thanks, everybody. Thanks again for joining us on another episode of What If You Could podcast. Please subscribe, like, share, and give us any feedback. We'd love to hear it. And remember, if you can dream it, you can do it. See you next time.